The marble floor was still wet when Edward Lawson's mop stopped moving. His hands trembled, not from age, not from exhaustion, but from the sound of his daughter's voice floating down from 17 floors above him. Her speech was starting. The biggest night of her professional life. And here he was, pushing a mop bucket past strangers who had once bowed before him. 3 years ago, this building had his name on it. His portrait hung in the lobby. Employees knew his coffee order by heart. Tonight, not a single person looked at his face. Because a janitor in faded blue overalls is invisible. And that invisibility was the only thing keeping him alive. Hidden inside the bottom shelf of that janitor cart, tucked beneath trash bags and cleaning rags, was a sealed envelope containing documents powerful enough to destroy the most dangerous man in American business. Before sunrise, someone inside that building would try to kill him for it. But upstairs, his daughter Amelia was about to shake hands with the same man who had stolen everything from both of them. And she didn't know. She had no idea. This is the story of Edward Lawson, billionaire, ghost, janitor, father. A man who chose invisibility over safety. A man who watched his daughter suffer from the shadows for 3 silent years. And a love so buried beneath sacrifice that it took a public revelation, a federal arrest, and a broken childhood photograph to finally bring it all to the surface. Stay with me, because this story is not about money. It is about the unbearable silence of a father who loved too quietly. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And if you are new here, click the subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. 3 years earlier, the name Edward Lawson was everywhere. Magazine covers, business summits, television interviews, charity galas. People called him the Lion of Wall Street, but that title never captured the whole truth. Because Edward Lawson had not always been powerful. He had once been a boy in Chicago with holes in his sneakers and a father who disappeared before his 10th birthday. He grew up watching his mother work double shifts at a laundromat, ironing other people's expensive shirts while wearing the same faded blouse 3 days in a row. That image never left him. It burned inside him like a fuel that never ran out. By the time Edward turned 22, he was working 3 jobs simultaneously: construction at dawn, taxi driving at night, and security guard shifts on weekends. He had no savings, no connections, no inheritance. What he had was a mind that never stopped calculating and a discipline that frightened even him. He met Clara at a bus stop on a Tuesday morning. She was late for a nursing shift and he was early for a construction site. They shared an umbrella in the rain. By the following Thursday, he knew she was the person he wanted to build everything with. They married young. They had almost nothing. But their tiny apartment on Maple Street felt like a palace because of the laughter inside it. Amelia was born on a cold December night. Edward held her in the hospital and wept in a way he had never wept before. Not from sadness, from something heavier than joy. A vow. He whispered it against her forehead that night. So quietly Clara didn't hear it. You will never know what cold feels like. I promise you that. And for years, he kept that promise through sheer force of will. He began buying abandoned properties, fixing them up on weekends with his own hands, selling them at profit, then reinvesting every cent immediately. Then came a fortunate meeting with a software developer who needed a financial partner for a real estate tech platform. Edward understood people. He understood desperation. He understood risk. He took the meeting on a lunch break, shook hands over a $5 sandwich, and signed a deal that would eventually be worth $40 million. Success came slowly at first, then all at once. Commercial real estate, hotel acquisitions, private equity partnerships, international expansion. Within 20 years, Edward Lawson was a billionaire. The Maple Street apartment became a 16-room oceanfront mansion. Little Amelia, who once wore second-hand shoes to school, now attended institutions where tuition alone cost more than most families earned in 5 years. But somewhere inside all of that ascent, something cracked quietly. Edward told himself he was building a future for his family. He told himself the phone calls at dinner were necessary. He told himself the missed recitals, the absent birthdays, the hollow apologies delivered through personal assistants. All of it was temporary sacrifice for permanent security. Clara warned him, not once, not twice, consistently, calmly, and with increasing sadness. "Edward," she said to him one evening, sitting across from him at a dinner table where his phone had rung 4 times in 10 minutes. "You are building a monument, but Amelia is not going to remember the monument. She is going to remember whether her father looked at her." He told her she was being emotional. He told her there would be time later. Then Clara got sick. Came fast, the way terrible things often do. 6 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. Edward flew back from 3 countries and canceled 2 board meetings and sat beside her every remaining day. But Amelia watched all of it from a distance. And she noticed that her father had needed a catastrophe to finally stop moving. At the funeral, Edward reached for his daughter. He put his hand on her shoulder, and she stepped away from him. Not dramatically, not loudly, just a single quiet step. Then she looked at him with her mother's eyes, exhausted, certain, and said, "You always loved the empire more than us." Then she walked away to accept condolences from strangers. Edward stood there in the cold air beside his wife's grave, and for the first time in decades, the most powerful man in American business had absolutely nothing to say. Those words stayed in his chest like a stone that never dissolved. In the years following Clara's death, Amelia channeled her grief into ambition. She joined Lawson Global Corporation, not out of loyalty, not out of admiration, but because she needed to prove to herself and everyone watching that she was not simply her father's daughter. She was her own person, sharp, relentless, quietly brilliant. She worked herself harder than anyone on the executive floor. She earned her credibility the hard way, and she kept her father at a careful emotional distance. Professional without warmth, dutiful without closeness. Edward accepted it. He told himself she needed space. What he did not see, what none of them saw, was that while he was grieving the distance between them, the wolves inside his own boardroom were sharpening their knives. Inside Lawson Global, Edward trusted 3 people above everyone else. His personal attorney, his younger brother Richard, and his chief financial officer Victor Kane. Victor was the type of man that organizations celebrate without truly understanding. He dressed impeccably. He spoke in measured, confident sentences. He remembered every person's name and every figure in every report. He had been at Edward's side for 11 years. And for 11 years, he had been quietly building a separate architecture beneath everything Edward owned. Fake shell companies registered in 7 countries. Forged transaction records. Offshore accounts receiving redirected capital from subsidiary holdings. The kind of financial manipulation so technically sophisticated that it took a team of federal forensic accountants over a year to fully map it. But the most devastating part of Victor's plan was not the fraud itself. It was the trail he built. Every single piece of evidence pointed directly at Edward Lawson. Every signature, every approval timestamp, every wire transfer authorization. Victor had spent years collecting originals, mimicking formats, learning Edward's approval patterns. And when the time was right, when the numbers were large enough and the setup was airtight, he triggered the collapse himself. Government investigators received an anonymous tip. Within 48 hours, federal agents arrived at Lawson Global headquarters with subpoenas. News helicopters circled the building by noon. Stock prices went into freefall before the closing bell. Amelia watched it unfold from her office window, her coffee going cold on her desk, her phone ringing without stopping. Edward arrived at headquarters to find cameras surrounding the entrance and his own board members refusing to meet his eyes. "Edward." His attorney pulled him into a side corridor, voice low and urgent. "The evidence is completely damning. Someone built this. They built it over years. And whoever it is, they control the narrative right now. The investigators, several board members, the media contacts, it's coordinated." "Victor," Edward said. His attorney said nothing. The silence confirmed everything. Edward tried to reach Amelia. She took the call. She listened. Then she said quietly, "Dad, they have documents with your signature. They have emails from your account. I want to believe you, but I don't know what to believe right now." And the line went quiet. That night, sitting alone in his office surrounded by family photographs, the Lion of Wall Street stared at a picture of 3-year-old Amelia asleep on his chest on a Sunday afternoon in the Maple Street apartment. And he wept, not for the frozen accounts or the falling stock or the legal siege closing in around him. He wept because his daughter's voice on that phone call had sounded exactly like Clara at the funeral. Exhausted, uncertain, already halfway gone. Then his attorney called back. Edward, listen carefully. If you stay visible, they finish you legally, financially, and I have reason to believe physically. Victor has the board. He has investigators on his payroll. He has the media. If you fight this in the open, you will lose, and Amelia loses the company with you. But if you disappear, if they think you have fled, Victor will relax. He'll overreach, and you can gather what you need from the inside. The inside of what? Edward asked. His attorney paused. Your own company, Edward. You built it. You know every corridor, every archive room, every access code that was never officially changed. You just have to become someone they'd never look at twice. The next morning, America woke to headlines announcing that billionaire Edward Lawson had vanished. And the truth was stranger than any of the theories that followed. He had not fled the country. He had cut his hair, grown a beard, put on a pair of reading glasses and blue overalls, and applied for a janitorial position at Lawson Global Corporation under the name Ed Harris. The HR officer who processed his application had joined the company 6 months after Edward stopped walking those floors personally. She never knew what he looked like up close. He was hired the same afternoon. For 3 years, Edward Lawson cleaned the building his mind had built. He mopped the floors of the boardroom where he had once made billion-dollar decisions. He emptied the trash bins of executives who had attended his charity dinners. He fixed leaking pipes beneath the executive washroom where men who owed him everything now stood combing their hair. Some evenings, an executive would pass him in the corridor without a glance. A man Edward had promoted personally. A man Edward had invited to his home, introduced to his family, mentored through 3 career transitions. Now the same man walked past him like a smudge on the wall. Edward learned to let it settle without reaction. He learned something else too, something that wealth had always obscured from him. Invisible people hear everything. Executives spoke freely around janitors the way people speak freely in empty rooms. He overheard deals, bribes, quiet manipulations that never appeared in meeting minutes. He documented everything. Small handwritten notes hidden inside a hollowed-out cleaning product bottle at the bottom of his cart. And slowly, floor by floor, conversation by conversation, he began to map the full shape of what Victor had built. But the heaviest part of those 3 years was not the labor or the humiliation. It was Amelia. He watched her every single day. He watched her arrive before anyone and leave after everyone. He watched her walk through lobbies with her chin up while the tabloids ran weekly headlines questioning whether she was capable of leading the company her father had allegedly looted. He watched Victor Kane position himself as her closest ally. Always present, always sympathetic, always steering. You are carrying your father's stain, Amelia. He overheard Victor tell her once in a corridor, voice soaked with false compassion. But the board trusts you. I trust you. We can rebuild this together. Just let me guide the restructuring process. Amelia had nodded slowly. Edward had kept moving with his mop, staring at the floor, jaw tight. Some nights, Amelia worked so late that only the cleaning staff remained. Edward would position himself near her floor and work slowly. Not to speak to her, just to be near her. One night, around 2 in the morning, he heard something shatter. He turned the corner and found Amelia crouching on the floor of her darkened office, picking up pieces of broken glass from a framed childhood photograph. The frame had fallen from her desk. She was on her knees in a tailored suit, collecting shards with her bare hands, her face unguarded in the way it only gets when a person believes nobody is watching. Edward pushed his cart slowly to the doorway. Ma'am, let me get that. Amelia looked up briefly. Leave it. I've got it. You'll cut yourself, he said quietly. She paused. Then she sat back on her heels and let him approach. Edward crouched down and carefully collected the broken pieces. The photograph was still intact inside the damaged frame. Little Amelia, maybe 4 years old, sitting on a man's shoulders on a beach, both of them laughing. The man's face was turned away from the camera. Edward's hands went completely still. He remembered that afternoon. He remembered Clara taking the photograph. He remembered Amelia's small fingers gripping his forehead for balance. He remembered the exact sound of her laugh. His chest closed. Amelia looked at him. You okay? She asked, with the flat curiosity of someone too tired to care deeply about the answer. Yes, ma'am, he said. He set the photograph on her desk, gathered the glass, and left. He made it to the stairwell before his knees gave out. He sat on the cold steps for a long time, face in his hands, not making a sound. His own daughter had looked straight through him, and he had never felt more alone in his life. If you are still watching up to now, type "I am still here" in the comment section. Several weeks later, Edward made a discovery that erased all hesitation. Victor Kane was preparing a final move. Through overheard conversations and fragments pieced together across multiple nights, Edward understood the plan in full. Victor intended to bring Amelia a major restructuring document framed as the only path to saving the company. Buried inside the legal language was a clause that would transfer majority controlling interest of Lawson Global into an offshore holding structure, one secretly controlled by Victor. Once signed, Amelia would be a figurehead. And when the structure eventually collapsed, as it was designed to do, she would be the face attached to the failure. History would repeat itself. Victor would vanish with the assets, and a second Lawson would have their name destroyed. Edward had days, maybe less. He needed the original financial drives his attorney had described, physical servers in the restricted executive archive room on the 14th floor. He had been moving toward them for months, learning the camera rotation, memorizing the guard schedules, identifying the 1 30-minute window each night when the corridor was genuinely empty. On a Wednesday, just after 1 in the morning, he went in. The archive room smelled of old paper and conditioned air. Edward moved quickly, using a maintenance access card that had never been deactivated because the IT department assumed the account belonged to a legitimate but rarely assigned facilities role. He found the drives in the third cabinet. His hands were shaking as he copied the files. Then footsteps, down the hall, getting louder. 2 security guards, based on the cadence. Edward killed the copy process at 87%, pocketed the drive, and moved to the far wall. There was a maintenance access panel behind the second filing cabinet. He had discovered it months ago, a tunnel that connected to the HVAC infrastructure running the length of the floor. He went in. The guards entered the room seconds later. He heard them talking. "Someone was in here. The cabinet is not fully closed. Pull the camera logs." Edward pressed himself flat against the tunnel wall, barely breathing. He waited 40 minutes before moving. The next morning, Victor Kane stood in the executive corridor and addressed the heads of security with a coldness that silenced every adjacent conversation. "There is someone inside this building gathering information," he said. "I want every non-executive staff member rescreened. I want camera coverage expanded to every floor. And I want it done quietly." He turned and walked back to his office. In the basement, an old janitor pressed the copy of the financial drive deeper into his pocket and understood that his window was closing. That evening, he made contact with the one federal investigator he had spent 3 years carefully identifying. A woman in the Financial Crimes Division whose career had been stalled repeatedly by pressure from above, and who had always believed the case against Edward Lawson was constructed rather than discovered. Her name was Special Agent Dana Reeves. "I have the drives," Edward told her over a burner phone from a parking garage 4 blocks from the building. "Kane is moving within 72 hours. The gala is in 3 days. He plans to have Amelia sign during the event, in front of the cameras, framed as a celebratory announcement." Dana was quiet for a moment. "If we move at the gala," she said slowly, "we can take Kane in front of every media outlet in the country. No quiet arrest. No managed narrative. Complete exposure." Edward said, "That is exactly what I want." The night of the investor gala arrived like a held breath finally released. Crystal chandeliers, formal suits, live press coverage. The kind of event that Lawson Global had not hosted since before the scandal. Designed deliberately to signal recovery, stability, and a new chapter. Victor had engineered every element of the evening. The merger announcement was scheduled for 9:45. The signing was to follow immediately after. Amelia had rehearsed her remarks 3 times. She stood backstage in a midnight blue dress, breathing slowly, reminding herself that she had earned this moment through 3 years of surviving what should have broken her. Victor appeared beside her. "You look formidable," he said with his practiced warmth. "Let's just get through it," she replied. In the basement, Edward Lawson removed his overalls. Beneath them, he was wearing a plain dark shirt and trousers, not a suit, not a performance. He was not trying to make an entrance. He was just a father who had been waiting 3 years for the right moment. He pressed a small communication device into his ear. Dana's voice came through clearly. Teams are positioned. We move when you do. Understood, Edward said. Upstairs, the ballroom filled with applause as Amelia walked on stage. She began her remarks, composed, precise, exactly what 3 years of carrying this alone had forced her to become. And then, at exactly 9:42, every presentation screen in the ballroom flickered. Amelia stopped mid-sentence. The room went silent. Then the screens filled with documents. Financial records, shell company registrations, wire transfer authorizations, offshore account structures. Victor Kane's signature, repeated across hundreds of pages, synchronized precisely with Edward's own stolen approval stamps, showing the mechanism of how one man had grafted a fraud onto another man's identity. A collective gasp moved through the ballroom like a wave. Victor's face drained completely. He took a single step toward the exit. Then a voice came through the ballroom speakers. Calm, unhurried, older than the room remembered. For 3 years you stole from my company. You destroyed my name. And you used my daughter's love for this business to try to finish what you started. Tonight that ends. The ballroom doors opened. An old man in plain clothes walked slowly across the polished floor, pushing a janitor cart. Reporters shouted. Cameras swung toward the entrance. Confused voices layered over each other. Then the man stopped. He removed his glasses, his cap. He looked up toward the stage. And Amelia Lawson, who had not seen her father's face in 3 years, stood in the center of 100 cameras and a packed ballroom and felt every rehearsed sentence she had ever prepared dissolve instantly. Her voice came out as barely a word. Dad. Federal agents moved from every entrance simultaneously. Victor Kane was handcuffed before he reached the second door. He said nothing. His face was the face of a man watching the architecture of 11 years of planning collapse in under 4 minutes. But no one in the ballroom was watching Victor. Every camera, every eye, every breath in the room was fixed on the space between a father and his daughter. Edward walked toward the stage. Not quickly, not triumphantly, just steadily. The way a man walks when he is no longer pretending to be anything other than what he is. Amelia came down the stage steps. They stopped a foot apart. She was shaking. He could see it in her hands, in her jaw, in the way she was pressing her lips together the way Clara used to when she was refusing to cry in public. 3 years, she whispered. You were here 3 years, and you never. I know, he said. I was falling apart, and you were. I know, Amelia. You were right there. I know. And then she stopped trying to hold it together. She pressed her face against his shoulder the way she had as a child, and she wept. Not the careful, composed emotion she had practiced for 3 years, but something real and old and long overdue. Edward held his daughter in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by cameras and federal agents and 600 stunned witnesses. And he did not say a single word, because some things cannot be explained. They can only be felt. The weeks that followed moved quickly and slowly at the same time. Victor Kane was charged on 43 counts of financial fraud, securities manipulation, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The case, once buried under a fabricated mountain of evidence against Edward, collapsed entirely under the weight of the drives Edward had copied from the 14th floor archive. Lawson Global stock began recovering within days of the gala. The board members who had aligned with Victor quietly submitted their resignations. International media ran the story for 3 weeks without stopping. Photographs of the reunion in the ballroom appeared on the front pages of newspapers in 14 countries. But inside the Lawson household, recovery moved at a different pace. There were difficult conversations. There were mornings when Amelia sat across from her father at breakfast and could not find the right words. There were evenings when Edward tried to explain a decision, to hide, to wait, to sacrifice visibility for strategy, and the explanation felt incomplete even as he delivered it. Why didn't you trust me? She asked him one evening. Why didn't you come to me instead of hiding? Edward was quiet for a long time. Because I thought protecting you meant keeping the danger away from you, he said finally. I thought if I appeared, they would use you to get to me, and I couldn't risk that. Not after your mother. Amelia looked at him. But you'd already lost me, Dad. Before any of this. I'd already been alone for years. He nodded. He did not argue. He did not explain. He just said, I know. And that is the thing I should have fixed when I still could. Before the empire. Before any of it. I am sorry for that more than for all the rest. It was not a perfect answer, but it was the first completely honest thing he had ever said to her. And something in the room shifted. Edward stepped back from all corporate involvement. No board seat. No advisory role. No honorary title. He told Amelia plainly, the company was hers, built now by her own hands, and it should remain entirely hers. He bought a small house near the ocean. He took long walks in the morning. He read books Clara had always recommended and he had never found time for. He learned, slowly and with great difficulty, how to be still. One afternoon in late autumn, Amelia drove out to visit him. They walked to the beach without planning to. They stood watching the water as the light went amber and wide. She was holding the restored childhood photograph, reframed after the night it shattered on her office floor. Little Amelia on her father's shoulders. Both of them laughing. Clara behind the camera. I kept it on my desk even when I was angry at you, Amelia said quietly. Edward looked at the photograph for a moment. Why? She thought about it. Because the man in that picture wasn't a billionaire. He was just my dad. And I missed him, even when I didn't want to admit it. Edward looked out at the water. I spent 30 years building things, he said. And the only thing I ever built that mattered is standing next to me right now. I just forgot that for too long. Amelia slipped her hand into his, and they stood like that for a long time. Father and daughter. Not billionaire and executive. Not founder and heir. Just two people who had survived the same storm from opposite sides of it, and had somehow found their way back to the same shore. So tell me something. If you were Amelia standing in that ballroom, would you have run to him? Or would 3 years of silence have created a distance that no revelation could close? And what about Edward? Did he make the right choice? Staying hidden, staying close, protecting without revealing? Or was the sacrifice too great, too long, and ultimately something his daughter should have been trusted to share? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, because the most powerful conversations happen after the story ends. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you love, someone you have been too busy for, someone you have been protecting from a distance when what they actually needed was your presence, share it with them today, not tomorrow, today. And if you are not yet part of this community, subscribe now and turn on notifications. We tell stories here that do not leave you easily. Stories about love and pride and the quiet sacrifices that never make headlines but shape every life they touch. We will see you in the next one.